a boathouse there?
That came also much later in time to it. The boathouse is set back from the lake and really is a collection shed and work shed. And this is more of the original camp. The photo on the right shows the camp as it was circa 1959, 1960, where my dad had begun putting the addition on, which is in the left side of the photograph on the right, and it's decked over. Because it was all done out of pocket and on his spare time, it took a while to get that erected, roofed, and done. The photo on the left shows one of our early boats, and that's my sister and myself in an old Elgin boat with old, at the time it wasn't old, with a Elgin motor on it that was a rope start. My mom did not like that motor and frequently had difficulty starting it, and so often would row to shore for different things.
So your mother was here with the 4 kids for most of the summer, and Dad came up on weekends?
That's correct. The day school let out, we were up here, and the day or so before school started up again, we went back to Lynn. And Dad did come up on weekends. We were a 1-car family, and we'll talk more about that down the line.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's inside the camp.
Well, this is somewhat more contemporary, but it does show a lot of the history that we went through. On the left photograph, the fireplace, the big stones on the bottom were put in by my grandfather as hearthstones on it. Incidentally, I can recall as a very young child being with him as he moved rocks. His vacation was moving big rocks, and it'd spend days moving an individual one. And so he had the whole hearth laid out and much of the foundation done when my dad continued on in the process. So referring to the fireplace, the part up to the mantle was all done by my father with rocks collected in the area. And my job as a young child was to go get rocks for my dad for the next weekend. And he'd give me bundles of 3 sticks. He'd want something this long, this wide, that wide, and put them over here with that bundle. And he'd have a whole bunch laid out so that he could do his masonry work the next weekend.
Where did you get the rocks?
I went out swimming and got them.
And then what about the other part of the fireplace?
Well, he built the fireplace around the frame of a heatilator. And unfortunately, most of those from hot fires and from moisture were metal, and they rusted out. This one did, and it actually had cracked the back wall. And I had to take it down to the mantle and rebuild from the mantle on up, and a fireplace. And I gathered rocks and got ready. I was doing that, but I hired a mason to do the actual work. I did haul the sand necessary to mix all the mortar, and it was an unbelievable amount of sand that came from the Pellini's pit down by 7-Eleven now. And I went to Bobby Pellini to try to pay him for all the sheetrock bales of sand I got. And he says, well, how many did you get? And I said, I lost count, Bobby, but it was probably 300 or more. And he reached in his pocket and says, I got to figure out how much I owe you. So,
and in the photo on the right, underneath the clock is the old ice chest.
Yes, and that was our refrigeration when I was quite young. We did not have an electric refrigerator. There was electricity at the island. but we had that ice chest, and Mom used to row to shore. She didn't like the motor, and Evie Moody from the ice house would deliver a block of ice and put it in a cardboard box in the boat. And I did early thoughts. I was quite young, but he was an imposing character to me because he wore like a leather apron, a skull cap, and usually didn't shave but once a week. And this wasn't the day that he had shaved. And it was sort of that kind of, yeah. But that was how we kept things cold. And when you look at an ice box that, as it's seen on the right, there are two doors on the left. The upper door is where you put the ice, and you had a tray underneath that would catch the water dripping down, and you'd empty it once a day. It was also where you could keep milk and stuff that would stay nice and cold, though we didn't keep a lot of it there. And the other side had whatever else went in it. In looking up, that ice chest was made by D. Eddy and Sons. And they were very large manufacturers of ice chests and refrigerators, as they were called, then about the turn of the century, about 1900. So that's circa 1900, 1905. This one is in pine. They made them in a number of different things. And they were located in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And they were the biggest refrigerator maker in the country.
Wow.
So which I thought was interesting, and it still serves a purpose at the island. The piece on the left is just a china cupboard that is full of ironstone china, which my mom collected. Went to yard sales, went to antique dealers, wherever, and collected a tremendous amount of ironstone, which is still out at the island now.
That's wonderful. And how about telephone? Triggs has a phone line, is that correct?
That is correct, but that was received with some difficulty. Not all people on the island wanted a telephone. It predates cell phones, and getting to the island usually meant you were incommunicado. And a lot of folks wanted it to be that way. Others said, for emergency purposes, and eventually it got put in. So we had other signaling devices prior to that.
We'll get to that. So here are some family photos. You want to talk a little bit about these?
Well, the one on the left, the tall fellow, is my grandfather, Bayard Snow. Standing next to him is my dad, Carl, my sister, Susan, and her two children, Debbie and Stephen. So that was, part of the family heritage. Everybody did try to get together once a year or more. The picture on the right is my brother Sam, my brother Russ, and my sister Susan on a Sunday morning to go to church. You'll note that I am absent from that, as I had an encounter at Sunday school when I was kindergarten or something, and had a disagreement with a nun had a disagreement with me, and basically whacked me and put me in the corner, and she was trying to explain sins. We didn't have Velcro, but she had some means of sticking these milk bottles up. And I still remember it because I was so mortified. And I knew that 2 cups made a pint, 2 pints made a quart, 4 quarts made a gallon. And she was explaining all of these things with milk bottle type things. And I said, it didn't add up. Well, then after I was very upset, my dad picked me up afterwards. I was bawling. I was all upset. He listened, he went, he got the Monsignor. We went and got the nun. By that time, I'm shrinking to nothing. Went back, looked at the stuff, came out. My dad said I didn't have to go to church anymore. So I went fishing with him Sunday mornings when the rest of the family had to go to church. And I became piscatorial.
Oh,
Here's
the state park played a big role in your life
it
and in
was,
the life of everyone on the lake in
it
the
was an
60s.
extremely important thing. And this unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the state park when we were early. And I do need to collect some. So if somebody has any, I'd like to put them in the archives. But Wentworth State Park was a little different from other state parks in the state. And they had swimming lessons. And everybody went. It was the 1950s. We were a one-car family during the week. Mom had no transportation. Take a boat over, as did many other people from other shores and other islands, and many, many, many town people. And so we all had swimming classes there. Plus, there was the safety of the community. And if Mom had to go shopping in the middle of the week, there was always somebody with a car that would, they'd drop the kids off and they'd go shopping, or they'd go antiquing or getting yard sailing or whatever it was. But so there was swimming lessons from beginners up through lifeguard, senior life saving. And lots and lots of people attended. What was truly amazing is at the end of the year, there was a community day at the state park, and it was very, very well attended. So there were races that set up lanes for swim races, and you get all kinds of ribbons if you get it. There was a beauty pageant. There were cookouts. There were things. There was beanhole beans. We'd spend a couple of days getting a couple of pits ready to bake beans in. And it was, once again, very well attended, not in line with what most of the state parks were doing, but it was certainly a community event. And for me, the number of individuals that I met and grew up with at the state park and have become friends over many decades, including lots of folks around town. It just was an invaluable time in life.
I know you said you played football in high school.
Yes.
But your friendships in Wolfboro were stronger than any you made back in high school.
Well, I was in 3 different sports in high school, and we didn't go out and socialize a lot and do a lot of other things afterwards. I mean, you might have had a game on a weekend or something, but then went home, did homework, and get ready for the rest of the week. But made a lot of friends on the teams and everything. But I think my closest friends and fondest memories were of the Lake Wentworth associations. And it expanded, of course, as we got a tad older. At the age of 13, I had saved money from a paper route I had in Lynn, a Sunday paper route, and I bought a 7.5 horsepower outboard and rebuilt a 16-foot flat bottom boat, and I had freedom from the island. And the youngest of 4, that was a good thing, because for my older brothers and sister to go to shore or go do things in the evening, they couldn't take the family boat. They had to take the canoe. To take my boat, they had to take me. So I was somewhat precocious in.
Tell me about your first job in the summer.
Oh,
was that at the state park?
I did have a job at the state park, 13 or 14, parking cars on Sunday. And the state park, by the way, used to get a lot more business than it does now on a weekend. It really would pack people in there. And you had to really guide people in. But everybody was always really gracious and nice. Some little kid telling them go here. But I had other employment, 13, 14. weeding a garden in Wolf. I guess I was 14, and that was Fred Long, who was sheriff. His sister ran the state park, but that was Valmer Elliott that ran the state park. But I used to go tend his garden, and then his brother-in-law was building houses on Canapache Lane, and they needed somebody to dig dirt, do stupid things, carry shingles up onto the roof. He paid me $5 a day.
So being a lifeguard at the state park was better than that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was when you were 18?
Well, I first was a lifeguard at Brewster Beach when I was 17. Then at the state park, and I had my water safety instructor. And one of the thrills was teaching swimming. And so once again, it was the only state park in the state that had it. Nobody said we couldn't. And so many of the people that I know around town now were either students or parents of students that were taking swim lessons.
That's great. So I'm going to move to Triggs Landing now, and we'll talk a little bit about what it was like to get on and off the island.
So I think that if we look at the picture on the left, the method that everybody had from shore of contacting the island was by horn signals.
Car horn.
Car horns. So Friday night, my dad would be coming down the hill from Birchmont, coming down. You'd start hearing 32, 3 long and 2 short. Yeah. By the time he got to Jeans, they'd blow it a couple more times, and would try to have a boat at the landing waiting for him because he wanted out to the island in a swim.
So this is his handwritten sign.
This is yes. As I said, father was an engineer, as was grandfather, and by education, theoretically, I am. My son is an engineer, but he at some point had written this up. So there's the Rush Camp, the Scott Pine Aldrich Camp, and you know the different ones. Like Rush was 1 long and 2 short, and Scott Pine was 1 long, 3 short. And so what would happen is if the wind was blowing, it was only people on the landing side that would be able to hear the signals. But there were enough kids on the island that they'd trot across the island to tell somebody they're blowing your signal.
Well, there's still an inland path all the way around the island to 12 camps. Is that correct?
And there were more before. There is an island path. When they had recleared the power lines, incidentally, power was brought into the island during World War II. And it was under the rural electrification process. And they just envisioned 1 lamp pole in the middle of each camp. And of course, that expanded so that eventually we did have refrigerators, and we'll talk about that more. But
well, that's a great segue to the next slide.
Well, there's the landing on the right. We have our boat launch there. We have 3 docks there for people to keep a boat at, and
that's a private launch just for Triggs Island.
That's correct.
And you do have a launch and the docks, but not public.
That's correct.
Can you talk a little bit about the Triggs Island Association and what that does?
Well, the Triggs Island Association was formed in the early 1900s, and we're guessing back at it probably in the 1914-ish era. And notes have been kept continuously every year since. We have an annual meeting. It is a tax-exempt society. And reading back through old notes it's very interesting. The same subjects came up in 1920 that come up now about parking and taking care of the docks. And lake level has always been one.
Well, I know it was called Minister Island.
Because the original purchase was done by a Stier. and two other ministers from Rhode Island. And they built the first three camps on the island. The Stiers then bought the sister islands and moved to there, sold off of Triggs.
And William O. Douglas owned their camp, Chief Justice.
He wasn't Chief Justice. He was a Supreme Court Justice. And that was the camp that Stier built originally. And
did you ever meet him?
Owns it now.
Did you ever meet him?
No, he was before my time.
Okay. So speaking of your time, I asked you about your boats and we talked about refrigerators, and this is sort of a hybrid photo that I think needs some explanation.
Well, one of the things, getting things to the island in small boats has always been a challenge. And refrigerators are awkward devices. And I know that bought one at the street fair as a spare one. And Steve Johnson and I were bringing it out to Triggs, draped across the gunnels of an aluminum boat. Got to the island and we both hopped out, and it was a little heavy on one side. So the refrigerator got out by itself. And we looked at each other and said, well, I guess we'll wash it now. We picked it out of the lake and stood it up, let it dry for a few days, and then plugged it in. And it worked fine for years. But that is not the first refrigerator that I know of being brought to Triggs Island that has gotten a bath. I know of two others for sure. This particular one is a refrigerator that had been in the boathouse and failed. It had outlived its useful life. We had a new one, and at this point we had a bunch of help to bring the new refrigerator, take the old refrigerator, bring it to the boathouse, and we're left with a junk refrigerator. And we were pretty late in the day, tired of moving things, and I looked around and I had that 6 horsepower Evinrude sitting there, and it strapped right into the freezer compartment, and we backed it up, and by gosh, it floated. And someone insisted that I put on a life jacket before we headed to shore.
I love that story. And you had a bit of a reputation for your cannons as well. Was this your largest one?
Well, its bore diameter is large. It is not my largest gun. This is actually a line throwing gun, and I acquired it at the boat museum one year and brought it out.
At their auction?
Pardon?
At their auction?
Yes. Yeah, it was not expensive. And it's a Hume, H-U-M-E, line throwing gun. Line throwing guns were used to, on one ship, to send a rope that you'd pull a stronger line to put another boat in tow, or get it off a lee shore, or, you know, whatever you could get a line to, send it to. We used it as a noise maker. It made a lot of noise. However, we discontinued using it on the dock as the structure wasn't quite adequate for it. And virtually every time we set it off, we'd have to get it out of the lake and rebuild the dock.
Your youthful escapades aside, what have you learned from your time on the lake? And if you could ask other people to do one thing to take care of it, the watershed and the lake, what would that be?
Well, you know, to say that learned an awful lot on different things. Some of it, sure, I learned to fish and everything, and I also learned to put fish back. And I learned when they shouldn't be taken, and I still enjoy walking out on the dock, and just recently was standing on the dock watching sunfish, and the male making his red and the female coming in and turning on her side and laying her eggs while he fertilized them, and then she'd go off someplace else. But there are other things. We had indoor plumbing, a flush toilet. Father in addition to his other engineering feats, of which there were many, was a sanitary engineer and designed a septic system. Not one that would meet current specifications, particularly in the soil conditions that we have there. So as I bought out the rest of the family and refurbished the camp. Dad, although a wonderful engineer, was not a wonderful carpenter, and it needed a little improvement structurally. But I also said that we can't properly take care of that septic system. So I went back to using a self-contained aerobic toilet.
I think we have a picture of that.
Yes, so that on the left is the self-contained aerobic toilet. It does look out at the lake. It has a Dutch door. So if one were at the seat of ease, they can just keep the bottom part of the Dutch door closed and gaze out and wave to the kayakers going by, which occurred the other day. But that's a commercially available Sunmar toilet that composts all of the effluent material.
So there's less flowing into the lake.
There's virtually none at this stage.
Okay, your water still comes from the lake.
Water comes from the lake, and we do have hot and cold running water with extensive gray water things, although we use very little or no soap. But the original piping for the toilet had beneath it, when we put that in, a very long dry well, and that still exists. Separate dry well for the kitchen sink with stones. Every year we go out and rake some more out of the swimming area and put them in sheetrock pails, go out and add to it. And the scat house does have a small sink in it and a hand thing for hand washing.
It's a lovely little structure. You also own 325 acres in the watershed on Tumbledown Dick.
Yes, so Tumbledown Dick Mountain was one of those places that I visited as a youngster several times. Once by canoe going up the lake and up Warren Heath, and parking it at one of the beaver dams, and then climbing up to get up on top of the dick and having my lunch and walking around and just surveying stuff. And when I came back down, I just decided to follow stream back to the thing. Well, I came up a beaver dam to above where I'd left the canoe. And so rather than walk around, because I was tired by then, I just hopped in the stream and went down to my canoe. By the time I got to my canoe, I was sure that something was going to eat me in the water. There would got to be a big snapping turtle or something. But I was able to purchase some land. Well, Christmas of '95.
We gotta watch our time too. I know you
Maggie's
been a good
sister Carol, real estate agent, and at our Christmas party, I said, Maggie, if you run across a piece of woodland, I'd be interested in seeing one. I'd like to get something else to do. And she called the next week and said, we get this lot on Tumbledown Dick. Nobody's ever looked at it. It's 230 acres. So I tried flying over and looking at it, and I tried going in on snowshoes and looking at it, and you really couldn't tell much other than there weren't any trees on it. It had been harvested, just every piece of value they cut off it. Everything over 6 inches in diameter they could sell, they could cut. That left a lot of big, nasty old trees that I like. Young growing stock. So it was inexpensive, and I started, and the next year I bought the 25 acres adjacent to it because the gentleman that owned it was going through a divorce and needed 25K. I said, okay. So this is on the land. That's the gate. It is open space land. The gate is kept closed. The town road is on Tumbledown Dick Road coming in from the Brookfield end. And there is a short section of it that's class 6 and not good for low profile vehicles. But it's a short walk if you can park up above, or in anything that's got reasonable clearance, you can drive down, and there is parking adjacent to the gate just up the hill a little bit. And it's open to walk. There are numerous walking trails through it. There is a kiosk set up. It is under conservation easement now through Moose Mountain Regional Greenways and is therefore forever protected. It originally was 3 pieces of land that I combined into one, just so that down the line, nobody's going to say, you take this, I'll take this.
So you merged them all. The 4th and 5th generations are now coming along. How do you like to spend your time when they're there or when you're by yourself?
Well, by myself, there's a great deal of reading. I have aged quite a lot in the last few years, not just because I got old, but some disease got in the way as well. So I am not as functional as I would like to be. Maybe I'll grow younger in the next few years and get back to working in the forests more. My avocation, and would like to be able to do that. I still have to putter around the camp. There's always something to fix there or at my home in Tuftonboro. Incidentally, I can run from the camp to the house in Tuftonboro in 20 minutes, and all the laundry can be done there, can keep a garden there. The workshops are there, so the wrenches can be twisted there.
That's great. Here's a view from your dock, from your camp, looking at Tumbledown Dick to the east and the moonrise, I assume. What do you love most about the lake, and what are the rewards of your relationship with Lake Wentworth?
Well, obviously, the fond childhood memories are a big part of it, and all of the friendships gained over the time, and the interactions with people that went on. And we're talking, real growth stages, important times, the teenage years, and getting around, having a boat on a lake like this. You could go any place and visit people. So yeah, at age 13, I had a boat, but we were all over the lake all the time. So there was social interaction with people on distant shores, such as where you were, and on the islands in particular. There seemed to be a lot of mutual attraction. Geez, there were an awful lot of girls out there then. But it, the
Your
fact
memories of Stamp Act?
Oh, yes.
That
We won't
was a
talk
big
about
thing.
all of them. No, I can. It was a gathering place in our youth. So then the main beach, which is used, the only beach that is open now, we used to water ski off of there all the time. Water skiing was very big in those years too, and met more friends that way and all. Just it was delightful. The water quality has always been really surprising, and I've been to a number of the other lakes in the area. I really don't know of another one that really is as pristine as Lake Wentworth. And
So let's close with your advice to other people on the lake and in the watershed. What would you like to have people know from your experience?
Well, I think I'd like to think that there's becoming a greater awareness of connections to the lake, to the environment in general. And I would really hope that continues. The one that I see that really illustrates it is the decline in the bee populations, or the amount of pollinators that we have, and the number of beekeepers that have cropped up to try to alleviate it, which is wonderful. However, there still needs to be a great deal of understanding of why we are losing so many bees and so many native pollinators, and what we are doing environmentally that is altering our landscapes so that native insects, native bees aren't here. They don't like a lawn of Kentucky bluegrass. They don't like a lot of these plants that look good in the nursery and come from Japanese something or others. And I don't mean to denigrate the Japanese, but there's a lot of our shrubs don't support native insects and pollinators and birds. So if somebody wants to, we put bird feeders out to attract birds, but at the same time, they mow their Kentucky bluegrass to the point that there's no insects for the native birds to be there. And so that is part of it. Another part is, gee, what do you, why do you gotta have to have a lawn that you mow to 2 inches high? We're not in Garden City, New York, where you have to have everything put away and done. We're in the country. We don't have to have a lawn like that. And in fact, it'd probably look a lot nicer if you didn't. I would just would hope that others, that the community understanding, the greater community, gets spread around a tad more.
Well, as we saw with your camp, the traditional look is no lawn at all. It's just the pine duff and the native plants, whether it's low bush blueberries or jack in the pulpit or whatever wants to grow there, mushrooms, etc.
Well, it's a high bush blueberries.
A high bush too.
There's lots, and that was a
along the
chore
lake.
we had when we were kids. We had to go pick our blueberries daily to have our blueberry pancake or pancakes, pies and everything.
I think a lot of people have shared that experience, and maybe a lot of what you said tonight will resonate with others as well. So thank you. Let's see if we have some questions. Any comments or questions, Celia?
We do not have any currently, but if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll get them out. But yeah, you've got time for another story while people are thinking about questions.
Well, you said your father was president of the Lake Wentworth Association.
Yes.
What do you think his goals were for his presidency? And what did Walter Bowman have to say to him?
Well, you're asking a trick question there, because in going through some of the archives, I came across letters from Walter Bowman to my father as he was about to assume the presidency.
And Walter had just
I don't know.
He published a history of Lake Wentworth in 1956, so he was the authority on the lake at that time. His family was on Turtle Island.
Yes, and he was related to the Goldthwaits, who were on Lynn Shore, and the Porters down in Governor's Shore. There were a lot of people that interacted. Both of them, Dr. Bowman, was very kind to me. He, in going through letters that he had sent to my dad as my father assumed the presidency, he was somewhat didactic in what he thought my father should do. I went, oh, I didn't know he had wanted to exert that much control.
And were the big issues lake level, for instance?
That has always been an issue. And maintenance of the dam. In the early days, the lake used to get much higher than it does now in the spring. The water was used through Smith River to run the Excelsior mill, and there was a hydro plant there for that. Thaddeus Berry ran the mill. I thought he was a great guy. He was a machinist, and he straightened out an outboard motor shaft for me to put an outboard back together and keep going as a kid, and didn't charge me. But he put washboards on the dam in the spring to get the water level higher. When my grandfather initially put the large stones in for the foundation and the ones for the hearthstone, he left a channel out to the lake because his vision was being able to pull the boat right up under the camp in springtime. That, of course, went away with changes in the ownership of the water rights that the town now has. And of course, the dam has been rebuilt, and it pretty much should be self-sustaining through most of the year. Sometimes you have to keep an eye on who's opening and closing so that they understand that it impacts everybody around the lake.
There was a story about your father thinking that he could get into camp in April, or that he ought to be able to get into camp in April.
His feeling was that the ice was out of Lake Wentworth by the 19th of April every year. So we came up on the 19th one year. She's good.
Oh, good.
And the ice wasn't all the way out, but he was determined to get to the island. So we had a 14-foot cedar-sided, flat-bottomed lap-streak dory with a 7.5 on it. We piled into it and headed out. Initially, it just broke the ice out of the way, but then the ice got a little thicker, and he'd drive up on it and would a little forward and break the ice and back up and do it. And he was playing icebreaker, and sometimes it wouldn't break. So Russ and Sam hopped out of the boat and would dragging it across the ice. And first Sam went through up to his knees, and then Russ went through up to his knees a waist, and then Sam went to help Russ, and he went through all the way. That's when we were headed back to shore, and Harold Thompson was the chief of police, but he also had a lot to do with storing boats around the lake and everything. Somebody had called Thumper, as he was called. He was waiting at the landing for us. When we came in, he said, somebody called and said 4 damn fools and a dog are trying to kill themselves out on Lake Wentworth. He says, I knew just who it was. And what's more, I knew the missus wasn't with you.
That's a great story. I have questions here for you. The first one's from Steve Maher. Did you have a chance to enjoy Gene Head's grilled cheese at his shoreline restaurant?
I had many a grilled cheese sandwich there. I was a lifeguard at the state park for a number of summers. And yes, would
Gene
be that.
Head fed you well.
Well, it was a growing boy.
John McNabb, Marty, from the something McNabb camp on Poplar Island. Your parents graciously invited some islanders without electricity to watch the moon landing. It was a fond memory from my childhood. Do you remember this?
I do. Bobby Spear was there. Yeah.
Was this 68, 69? I think so. Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
69, right? Yeah.
We had a television in rabbit ears, and we could see it. And I don't know why now we're good so far advanced. Television doesn't work at my camp anymore, so I just have to go without.
What a great way to end. Thank you. It's been delightful to talk to you, and thank you, Celia, for doing the technical side. I hope we'll be back with some more interviews.
Thank you all. Stop by 5 Triggs.
Thank you so much for everyone coming and joining us for this first of our People of the Watershed series. We'll see you again soon. This recording will be available in the coming weeks to rewatch back or show to others who couldn't be with us live. Thanks all so much, and we'll see you around the lake. Bye for now.